From your world news headquarters on the World Wide Web, it's time for your daily dose of sanity. This is the Meria Heller Show. Meria Heller is a published author, founder of the Universal Wheel, a lifestyle and philosophy based on our interconnectedness to all living things, a Reiki master, and delivers the news with spiritual views. How many intuitive news decoders, animal rights activists, and vegetarian broadcasters are there? Just one, Meria. Meria has provided independent news for a smart audience for over 13 years now on the Meria Heller Show, available at Meria.net. MERIA.net. And now, here is your host, the mouth that roars, Meria Heller.
Good morning, world. Meria here, alive and kicking. How's everybody doing out there? Today I have another life-saving show for you. But I'd like to welcome my new listeners, especially my new listeners at iTunes. If you're listening to this show on iTunes, you missed a really good news show yesterday. Tomorrow, there is a great Stars Are Us segment where we discuss the astrology for the month. You'll want to catch that. And on Thursday, of course, I'll be back with the news. And today, I have a return visitor to the show, which I'll be telling you about soon. So if you are listening to this anywhere except through a subscription to my site, please consider either a subscription or a donation so you don't miss any of the other shows going on all week. So let me tell you a little bit about my guest. For my subscribers, of course, you know she's been on the show before. She's fabulous. Her name is Martha Rosenberg. She's a freelance writer. She's an editorial cartoonist. She's a frequent contributor to the San Francisco Chronicle, the Providence Journal, the Chicago Tribune. You've seen her work in the Los Angeles Times, Newsday, the Arizona Republic, so many other papers. But today we're going to be talking about the second half of her fabulous book, Born with a Junk Food Deficiency, How Flax, Quacks, and Hacks Pimp the Public Health. So without further ado, I'd like to say good morning to Martha. Good morning, Martha.
Well, good morning, Maria. I'm so happy to be talking to you again.
Hey, thanks for coming back. You know, the last time you were on the show, we discussed all the disgusting things in the pharmaceutical industry that attack our health. And I think that people, when we use the term born with a junk food deficiency, they think about, you know, McDonald's or Burger King or that type of stuff for junk food. But digging into your book, you really take on the real junk food, the stuff people buy and shop for and cook every day for their families, thinking that it's healthy.
Well, you know, a lot of people have wondered why don't we talk about high fructose corn syrup in there, and there is a lot of junk food that I haven't yet been able to cover in this book. But the meat and milk lobbies are hugely in bed with the government because, you know, USDA funds or supports those big ag, and so consequently, the meat and milk are presented as good for you when actually there's a good argument that they're more like junk food.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think most people think of that, especially, you know, the conscious people out there who say, you know, I'm buying range-free eggs and cage-free eggs, and they think they're doing the right thing for their family, but they really have no idea how bastardized our food has become.
Well, you're absolutely right. There's two different arguments. One is that products that might look free of the problems, you know, and healthy, a lot of times, maybe most of the time, aren't, and there's a lot of misleading of people. And one example that comes to mind is Tyson Chicken had a big campaign going, antibiotic free, until the FTC Trade Commission said no, it isn't. So there's that, and then there's the fact that even when these products are free from some of the veterinary medicines, they're not necessarily anything you want to eat anyway. You know, the big argument against a lot of meat, I'm not going to say no meat because a lot of people want to cut down as opposed to stop altogether,
right.
But the big argument is it's bad for the environment, it's bad for human health, it's certainly bad for the animals, it's bad for the workers from these big meat places, and it's even bad for the economy. Animal-based agriculture is misconceived, and that's why USDA buys up all this sellable meat and milk and dumps it in things like the school lunch program. So there's many reasons why the animal-based agriculture that our government supports is not good.
Well, I'm sure you saw the study this week that was released where they tested pork from stores across the country and found that 69% of what they tested was loaded with different bacteria.
Actually, I did not see that. That is a shock. Bacteria like MRSA and that type of thing?
Well, they listed 3 different bacterias, and they were surprised. People have no idea that our government doesn't have enough bodies out there to test all the food that ends up in our food supply.
Well, they're right, and they're cutting back. I talk in my book. There's a chapter about the slaughterhouses, and it talks about the federal meat inspectors, some of whom have stepped forward and exposed the system. But what we see more and more is a cutting back on the federal aspect of meat safety, because for privatization reasons, because it's obnoxious to the big meat industries to have somebody actually stop an assembly line. And so you see a diminished role of the inspectors. You see more and more of the risk, just like we talked in pharmaceuticals, being transferred onto the consumer. And a good example of that is how they'll now say, wash your breadboard, wash your knife, disinfect your, all the meat, the plates and the meat preparation and egg preparation, because they know that in these products is lurking, salmonella, listeria, and the E. coli and all these different bacteria that we so often hear about.
Absolutely. And, people say to me, well, Maria, my grandparents ate this stuff and, they lived to be 95 or whatever. And I said, we're not eating what our grandparents ate.
Well, we're definitely not. And, some of almost all, I think really all of the veterinary drugs in the meat today are not labeled, and so people don't really know. But in my research, I discovered that a lot the European Union and a lot of other countries boycott our meat, specifically beef, but not just beef, because of the hormones that are used to make the animal grow faster. And, big meat doesn't want to talk about these hormones, but, one is trenbolene, which is a testosterone-related drug that's used as an ear implant. And now it's a routine, all of the industrial, conventional, commercial beef is raised with this. Well, they say we chop off the ear, and it doesn't go in, with the implant, it doesn't go into the food supply. Well, maybe they do, but they don't throw it out. Another animal probably eats it, and we eat that animal. So what about the late 1980s, Europe, the European Union simply boycotted all of these products that we're eating every day,
Right. Well, just yesterday, Kenya, the country of Kenya, prohibited and banned genetically modified organisms.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay, so when you look at, here in America, we tend to poo-poo any other country that isn't us, because that's another mind program we grow up with. So, most Americans would think of Kenya as some third world backward state that, means nothing in the, in the hill of beans. But here you have the Kenyan people smart enough to reject genetically modified organisms. And here in America, we can't even get it labeled.
Yeah, when you mention Kenya or the poor countries that we used to call third world, but the non-industrialized and poor countries, it's a great irony that we're told how lucky we are and how unlucky they are diet-wise. And yet when you look at these people who are eating maybe plantains or cassava and some of the root vegetables, and they're not eating so much the animal-based dairy and meat, they're not all bent over with osteoporosis like we are. So you have to sometimes wonder. Certainly there's a million diseases we're lucky not to have, like river blindness or, dung fever, but the idea of a protein excessive diet that we're told is so good, when you look at some of these poor people, they actually look better. And there's many countries that we read about that have much less breast and prostate cancer than we do, and it's often thought that that's because of these hormones in our food supply.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So when you look at, where everybody says, oh, where are you going to get your protein? You have to have so much protein. I mean, who's behind the push on protein?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that one, Maria, because the title of my book, Born with a Junk Food Deficiency, is a spoof on the way that these products are sold. And there's been a big U.S. Beef industry-backed campaign to push this idea of protein deficiency, especially in elderly people. Like, well, you're not getting enough protein, and you should have beef. Beef. It's what's for dinner. But actually, we don't need nearly the protein that we're told that we have to have, and that is a misconception that sells product.
Absolutely. And I mean, most diseases in the United States are from people ingesting too much protein.
Well, there's certainly a school of thought, which I tend to agree with, that says excessive protein, which turns into an ash-like, product, can cause more harm than good in humans. And there's some articles that talk about excessive meat and protein actually contribute to the osteoporosis that we talked about last time, that they try to sell drugs for that, and also contribute to kidney disease, or they compromise the kidney. So there's definite downsides to too much protein, not to mention just the fat and the cholesterol and the calories.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, they'll often say, well, what do you do for protein? There are athletes out there who eat little or no of these meat products, and they're as good, if not better, athletes.
Right.
So it's out there.
Right. Well, a lot of people know who Jack LaLanne was, who recently died. But Jack LaLanne was a vegetarian his whole life. And, I mean, he really started the whole bodybuilding, weightlifting craze in the United States.
Well, I did not realize that. Wow.
Yeah, so, he was quite impressive. And, I mean, he lived to be well into his 90s. And, he was a good, example all that time. So, yes, it's a bill of goods we've been sold. And, when people argue with me, I don't have time to tell them, read the 75 books that I've read on this subject,
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at that, one of the earliest shows I remember doing when I first started, it had to be 2000, Martha.
Wow.
It was with a man named Robert Cohen. Now, Robert Cohen had a website and a book called, and I think he still does, notmilk.com.
Yes, I remember that.
And that was pretty revolutionary. I mean, for me, when I was a kid, my mother used to force us to drink milk. I never really cared for it. So I used to dip my dinner in the milk because I didn't care for my dinner either. That was when she started introducing meat into our normal peasant Italian food diet. And my mother was not a meat cooker. Okay, so I would just put everything on my fork and dip it in the milk to try to disguise it all. But when I read his work, and I had him on the show several times, it's such a long time ago, and you learn what's in milk besides all the poisons that are added to it, what they're allowed to have in it, pus and feces. I mean, I was like ready to barf. Blood. I mean, really disgusting crap. And I said, no wonder I didn't like it. Intuitively, I must have been against it as a kid. But I remember 40 years ago when I had my daughter, I was very blessed to have a pretty hep pediatrician for the times. And he immediately said, you will never feed your daughter whole milk. And even back then, he suggested skim milk.
Okay, sure.
And of course, milk 40 years ago didn't have all the garbage in it that it does now. But, I was very lucky to have a progressive doctor that way. And, looking back, I'm like, wow, even that was a break compared to, what people are feeding their babies now.
Well, you mentioned the way in which we're raised, like a certain mentality. And, when I was a kid, we didn't believe in car seats or helmets for the kids on the bicycles.
Right, we all lived
and it's
through
sort of the same thing because we just didn't know, and so now, we grew up, like you say, the milk is good, the meat is good. We don't question that. The whole Western diet that many of us were raised on, it is no longer considered what we want. For one thing, it doesn't have any fiber, and fiber is, such an important part of, health. But it's what we're told, what we're raised to believe, and that's why these food habits, these eating habits, die hard because people were raised. A lot of the messages really were crafted by the farmers, working through USDA. The whole food pyramid and food groups has been changed since it was originally.
Right, and it's never changed by health professionals. It's always changed by the food industry. Mm-hmm. That's what people have to understand, is that we've all been hoodwinked.
Well, and I grew up with very, very little meat, not because it was bad for you, but because it's expensive, which any poor country will tell you it's a treat. It's not like a daily thing,
Well, I use it
so
as
we
an
had,
accoutrement.
maybe once, twice a week we'd have little sprinkles of some kind of meat in the noodles,
Right.
But I just didn't grow up with any protein deficiency,
Right. Well, somewhere along the line, we were encouraged, to eat the meat. And when you look at, I know because I have, my own business where I do consultations for people, especially health-wise, and so many people suffer digestive disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, and let's not leave out, as the commercial used to say, constipation. Okay.
Yeah.
And they don't realize it's because they're not eating any fiber, that meat they're eating, if they're healthy, is taking 48 to 72 hours to exit their body, that it really can be corrected with the proper diet. Years ago I had John McDougall on the show. He has an excellent book out called Digestive Tune-Up. And I can't tell you how many people I've said, here's the book, buy it. Okay? It's easier, sometimes it's easier than just going through the whole thing. And I can't tell you how many people I've said, you need to own Martha Rosenberg's book. It needs to be in your home library.
Well, thank you very much. Another thing that when you mention the constipation, and people don't talk about that much except, I suppose, when they're trying to sell over-the-counter drugs. But, another thing that less meat-intensive, less protein-obsessed countries don't have that we have a lot is the hemorrhoids. Mm-hmm. That's a real Western thing, too, because it's all with the no protein and the tedious digestion. And, that you could make many arguments against it. And what... Of course, I have a chapter in the book, Born with a Junk Food Deficiency, about eggs, too. But what you always hear when you hear well-funded messages is that these are when you hear that they're good for you, it's because these are from the industry. Like recently, there was an industry-based message that eggs are not necessarily bad for you; they're actually okay for you. Well, who's saying that? The egg industry is saying that. So I always tell people, be cynical when you hear these messages. You have to dig for messages such as you're giving because they're not the big funded, glossy messages out there, for example, on the web,
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I often think about, some of the movies that we get to see, especially in The Matrix, where human beings are being raised basically as food or, batteries for these alien beings. And how horrified everybody in the audience gets, especially when you hear these stories of aliens abducting pregnant women and taking their babies and whatnot. But in a way, we do the same thing to animals, so why is that our worst fear?
Yeah, I'm frankly shocked that people can live in such a denial bubble about what happens to the animals, in terms of not just the slaughterhouse, which of course nobody wants to think about that, but their life up until that point. And we have such a dichotomy between the animals we love, the pets, right, and then the ones we turn our back on. And they're often even the same species, for example, birds, mm-hmm. or when you think about all the animals' lives that we have allowed to become so poor because of saving a buck or two, on the food, or having the farmer save the money. Whenever you have these videos exposing factory farming and this egregious cruelty that happens,
right.
People look at them and they usually say, well, that's an exception, or that wasn't behind the steak I'm eating now.
Right.
And I don't think anyone wants to believe it is, because first of all, you'd have a moral decision to make.
Right.
And secondly, Big Food wants you to believe that it was rabble-rousers. But, one group I've worked with here in Chicago, they've now moved to California, called Mercy for Animals. For almost 10 years, they've been going undercover into slaughterhouses and factory farms, and they've chosen the names of these operations randomly, and every one that they've gone into has shown up with these just stuff you don't even want to look at it. Right. Personally, once I've looked at it, I'm not going to eat those products. That's me. Now, other people can just forget that,
Right.
But the thing that I'm always shocked at is when we hear like a shirt is made from oppressed clothing workers, which of course a lot of our clothes are.
Right.
People will act more, and they'll say, well, they'll write their congressman and they'll say, we won't buy. They'll boycott the broker. They don't want the sweatshops and the child labor. And all this stuff is so terrible. It goes on all the time, but you don't really see the same thing with the animals.
Right. Well, it's cognitive dissonance. I interviewed Melanie Joy several months ago. She had a really good book out on, I think the title was something like Why We Eat Pigs, Wear Cows, and Love Dogs.
I remember hearing, yes, that
Right.
title rings a bell.
Right, and she coined the term carnism. Carnism.
Yes.
And, she does explain the psychological programming of why we have that cognitive dissonance in it. So, and for new listeners or people new to the show, that is still in my archives. Just put her name, Melanie Joy, in the search bar. Now, when you talk about Mercy for Animals, I've had Nathan Runkle on my show since he's 16 years old.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he's one of my personal heroes. And
Me
seeing
too.
him all over your book gave me such joy.
Well, he is such a visionary, because he came to Chicago. He moved Mercy for Animals to Chicago, some years ago, when really the animal groups in Chicago were at a low ebb, and anybody would have said, you can't radicalize these people, you can't make them active, And he just through brilliance and dedication has just done so much with that group. He's brought the message in a way that people can receive it, and especially he's gotten credibility with news outlets like CNN and nightly news and the big television outlets, which there was a time when they wouldn't even look at this animal.
Yeah, that's unheard of, right. It's unheard of, but every time you see a bust that does show up in the news, it's usually Mercy for Animals, and I'm so proud of him. Because I've known him since he's a boy, and he's had this kind of courage, and he's a very slight little boy at the time.
Where did you originally know him? Because I don't think he's Arizona.
No, I've never met Nathan in person. I've had him on my show since he's 16.
Oh, my gosh.
Every so often I get him back on the show. And, looking through your book and some of the experts you quote, even Colin Campbell and his cancer study out of China, I had him on my show.
Oh.
So, reading your book was like a little review of my roster through the years. And this is why, I do tell my audience the purpose of these shows are not to make you feel guilty. They're to educate you and point you to all the experts who have done the work, because they love you, your health, and the animals as well. But, Colin Campbell's study in China and cancer and the diet was off the charts. You would have thought that would have been, front page news in America, but of course we know better.
Yeah, his book was probably it was noticed, but it wasn't noticed as much as it would have been if it would have sold product, And one thing I mentioned in my book is that we had a school teacher here in Chicago he was an art teacher in a middle school, and he did an art display against factory farming, and he was fired for it. And then he had a hearing. It wasn't really a legal trial, but it was a hearing in front of the school board. And Colin Campbell flew in to testify, which I just thought was so huge.
Yes, it is huge.
Because at the heart of this teacher's, arguments, like why he did what he did, was the whole school complicity with the milk industry. Because all over the cafeteria they have these posters, with the mustaches, trying to tell kids to drink this, which some people call milk liquid meat. And they say it'll make you thinner or it'll keep your bones from snapping. Well, it won't make you thinner because that's ridiculous. And as far as you're strengthening your bones when you're 20 or you're 16 or you're middle school, you're 12, you're not at risk of osteoporosis,
Right.
But that whole dairy thing, I'd like to say this too about dairy, and again, not to make people feel guilty, but just to open their eyes a little bit. Now, a lot of people know about veal, the veal calves, and how they're taken from their mom, and within a couple of days of birth, and they wouldn't eat veal. Many people won't eat it. I certainly won't eat it. But I don't think people realize that when you drink milk or consume a dairy product, you might as well eat veal, because veal is a byproduct that makes the whole dairy industry tenable economically, because the veal calf, which they slaughter, is how you keep the cow pregnant and you keep the milk flowing. And so the veal calf, the dairy industry is said to be really crueler than, the other beef, the real beef industry, because of the economies of scale. And so, if milk looks so innocuous, think, well, his mom gave it to me, it's in my glass, I go to sleep with it. If people would think about, or learn about, the aspect of the veal calves, they'd realize that this is not an industry you want to support. And there's so many great milk substitutes that I personally have enjoyed, like, of course, soy milk, but also rice milk, and now hemp and coconut milk are really wonderful.
Right, I got to tell you, I have a big half a gallon of almond milk in my fridge and coconut milk.
Oh, you love them?
Well, when I weight train, so when I get home, I make my shakes with coconut milk or with almond milk.
Well, they're wonderful. There's also even oat. And like you say, the almond. Now, the almond is very low calorie, so you're actually doing your body a favor if you substitute it from your, so nobody's being asked to give up milk at all,
Right.
But you would give up this big commercial U.S. dairy, which is just causing all kinds of, environmental, the way these big polluting farms with their manure pools, or lagoons. So, yeah, almond milk, and now I've not tried coconut, but I love rice. Rice milk is wonderful.
All right. I'll tell you what, that coconut milk is sinfully delicious. It's like having dessert. But I like everything coconut, so what can I say? In your book, you talk about mad cow disease. Years ago, I don't know if you remember Howard Lyman.
Yes, I do.
Howard Lyman had written a book on mad cow disease. He got on Oprah. Oprah ended up getting sued for that segment of her show for exposing the filth in the meat. I was very fortunate to get Howard on my show. And I do recall at the end of the show, because unlike Oprah, I had read his book. He said to me that it was a better interview than Oprah. And, I wasn't surprised. I said, I don't get cheat sheets. I actually do the homework. And then I had Dr. Michael Grieger on the show. Now, between the two of them, Michael Grieger said a couple of things that were enough to turn anybody's stomach. Number one, he said that the chicken you buy in the grocery store, if you take it home and dip it in your toilet bowl, it can't get any filthier than when you take it home.
Oh, my gosh.
That was
I've
a
never
stomach
heard that,
turner.
Oh, my gosh.
Right, and he believes that all flu comes from eating chicken. And when I read, and we also discuss the epidemic of Alzheimer's disease. And Dr. Grieger, I believe, said that he believes it's misdiagnosed mad cow disease because the symptoms are the same. The brain destruction is the same.
Wow. Well, you've opened up a whole area there. First of all, Howard Lyman, Well, both of those men are my heroes. But certainly the Oprah being sued by the cattlemen is something that a lot of people have forgotten, and I do predict it will come back as an issue. Mm-hmm. The mad cow disease, and I know Grieger has written a lot on it also, but there are many different types of brain conditions that we see, not just Alzheimer's, but Pick's disease and of course the CJD, which is the human aspect of mad cow, that we don't necessarily know what causes them or where they come from, and the government very, very much underplays it, because one suspected outbreak of mad cow in humans, like in a hospital, roils the meat markets, the futures industry, and
Right.
So they definitely, and so I have a whole chapter in the book, mad cow disease, forgotten but not necessarily gone. And the reason I'm concerned about it is the government has a history of misleading people when it comes to risks. And the first example that I have in the book is in 2003, at the very end of that year, we had our first mad cow within the food supply. And this cow had been born in Canada and brought down to Washington State. And so they theorized that she had been eating other cows or the risk material in Canada. And so the government said that this animal had not gone into the U.S. food supply. But both the Los Angeles Times and the San Francisco Chronicle said she had. So, I hate to say this, but when it comes to who am I going to believe, I'm going to believe the newspapers.
Right.
And specifically this cow, and not just the cow, but the lot of meat that she was in, went to 11 California restaurants and was served up as soup bone, or soup made from her bones, or
Right.
possibly hers and others, because it's all mixed. And so that was bad enough, but then the second insult to any consumer who doesn't want to die, from beef
Right.
risks, that the local politicians would not tell food consumers which restaurants those were, because they protected the identity of the...
Right.
And then along the very same lines, the federal government protected the identity of two ranches, one in Alabama and one in Texas, which subsequently raised cows with mad cow disease. They protected their identities. Within 1 month, both ranches were allowed to continue operations, even though they had risked the public's health, and they did not find the source of the mad cow in either situation. And what you see a lot is that they don't want to test for this stuff because the positive tests are so, dangerous to the industry.
Right, exactly. Plus, a lot of people have no idea, how much gas is used to color the food they eat. Different types of gases. Meat doesn't look bright red like it does in the package once it's been dead and chopped up. And you even say the same about tomatoes in there, which is another reason I only buy organic. I was like, God, even the tomatoes are gas so they can stay red. Martha, we have to take a short break, so hold that thought, and everybody out there, hopefully you're not having lunch right now. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Meria Heller, taking a break from my own show. I've been the producer and host of the Meria Heller Show for, since July of 2000. Other people claim to be the longest podcast on the net. I actually am. Or as Greg Pallas said, Maria's the inventor of Internet radio. I'm not a member of any political party. I'm not a member of any religious group. I'm just a member of the human race, just like you, trying to survive and know the truth about what's really going on out there. So won't you please take the time while you're listening to this show to subscribe? Get over to Meria, MERIA.net, pick the subscription of your choice, make a donation, and sit back and listen to commercial-free talk from the best experts on the planet that only have you and me in mind. because if you're going to trust your government to take care of you, that's going to be one of the biggest mistakes you've ever made in your life. So, again, thank you for subscribing, thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing the information with anyone who will listen. Again, back to the show. Okay, welcome back. Remember, this holiday season, best gift you can give anybody is the gift of knowledge and education, because many of my listeners have said this show has literally saved their lives. So remember, too, that I just put the information out there. What you do with it is your own business. I don't care if you want to go, hit a Burger King after this show, but at least do it intelligently. I'm back, and of course, I'm speaking with Martha Rosenberg. Her book, Born with a Junk Food Deficiency, How Flax, Quacks, and Hacks Pimp the Public Health. And trust me, they do. Martha, a while back, it's got to be maybe a year or two now, I had interviewed Kevin Trudeau on one of his latest books, where he kind of exposes the food industry, pharmaceutical, etc., in a different way. But he makes it very clear and names names that everybody that produces our food, the few companies left that produce our food, also own and produce all the pharmaceuticals and diet centers in this country. Mm. So it's problem, reaction, solution. They make you sick, they make you fat, and then they give you the cures and the diet centers too. So it's very shocking, and I know for new people what we're talking about might be very shocking or sound far-fetched, but they need to either do the homework or access the over 800 hours I have here on my site.
Well, you've interviewed so many of these top leaders in this area from the standpoint of food safety, Howard Lyman and Michael Grieger, and from the standpoint of animal cruelty, Nathan Runkle.
Uh-huh.
And it is true that the big pharma and big food are very, very closely connected, especially when it comes into the animal drugs. That the same same companies can easily play both sides of the street. And you see that in a lot of cases. One thing that you see a lot is the selling of these GERD medications. There was a time when that was called heartburn. It wasn't gastro reflux disorder, But again, that could be from not eating well, not eating the good stuff. Because if you eat good food, it shouldn't cause you to burp and things like that.
Right.
And so then you take these over-the-counter, purple pills, and those cause the bones to thin. So then they're playing both sides of the street,
Right. Then they can sell you some bone pill that doesn't work. You have a chapter in the book, which everybody should read, and then think about it. The drugstore in your meat. And you have a cute little cartoon, by the way, when you're talking about all the antibiotics in chicken, where one guy says, no wonder chicken soup works when you're sick. People have no idea, and this is what I try to tell people. When I was a kid, if my parent, my mother or my grandmother wanted me to go pick them up, say, a steak, I would go downstairs to the butcher, which was a couple of stores down. It was always separate stores for everything. Mm-hmm. And the butcher would haul out a giant piece of meat, and he would slice it right in front of you to order the way you wanted it. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then wrap it in brown paper, which, I'm sure people, unless they're over 50, have no recollection of that. But you saw what you were getting. When my grandmother sent me for chickens, there was a giant store with 1 million chickens running around, literally running around. And you would pick out your chicken. They would butcher it. They would feather it. And you would take it home. But, it was up to my mother or my grandmother to section it, quarter it, and finish the cleaning and cook it, which I thought was totally grotesque. But what was I going to do? If they sent me to the store, I had to go or I'd get my ass kicked. But this was the way it used to be. Now, a lot of those places didn't have air conditioning. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of flies, okay? All kinds of things happening, natural things. But nobody got sick off that meat, because that meat we're talking about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when it wasn't a drugstore laying there waiting, being gassed and all these other things to make it look more palatable. Of course, my grandparents lived long because they were eating really fresh, close to nature food. I mean, you couldn't get more close to nature than a butcher hauling out a half a cow on his back. We were used to that. So to us, it was normal. But looking at it now, it's pretty grotesque.
Well, there's two issues there that we could discuss. One issue is the idea of killing your own meat. And I know some people say that the only honest way to kill meat is to do it yourself or acknowledge it, look at it, experience it, accept it. I personally believe that there's only two reasons to kill: self-defense and euthanasia. I don't believe in killing because something tastes good on your plate. So there's that whole issue of slaughter. How many people can eat meat only because they're not witnessing the animal's last breath and the animal's look of fear in its eyes and that type of thing. But then the standpoint of the commercialized meat with all the drugs in there is certainly the case that in our grandparents' day and even our parents' day, it wasn't a drugstore in their meat, as the chapter in my book talks about. That you could trust it. It wasn't grown as quickly as it's now grown with all the different tricks that they pull. When we hear about the hormones in the beef, making beef grow faster. And there's a drug I write about in this book called rectopamine, which is another drug we can discuss. But another thing that's used in some of the poultry is arsenic-laced feed. And it's inorganic arsenic, so it may not really hurt us. But why is it permitted by FDA? Because it makes the animal grow faster. So there's many reasons they don't want people to know what's really in this meat.
Right, as people be grossed out. I mean, a couple of months ago I had the report on my show that because of the drought, they don't have enough feed for the animals, so they started feeding cows gummy worms and candy, because the candy was cheaper than, trying to get feed because of the drought. So I'm like, what if you're a diabetic and you're eating a cow that existed on gummy worms? What kind of world is this? I said.
Wow.
So it's very sad. But you talk about in your book, 70% of antibiotics goes to livestock in this country. You look at the amount of allergies and asthma that our children have today. How can they not make a connection between the food supply being loaded with so many drugs? When I was a kid, I don't know any children that were allergic to peanut butter or peanuts. Mm-hmm, and today, peanuts kill more people every year than a lot of other things. And I know it's because it's genetically modified. And then I think about, is it all a big cocktail between the genetically modified food, the antibiotics in the food, and the vaccines and the milk? Are they all put together to work in tandem to destroy our health? I mean, you have to start thinking that way.
Well, big food and big pharma can get away with a lot of these dangerous products because it's almost impossible to prove, my allergies came from this, or my kid with learning problems came because I ate this. It's very difficult to prove any of this, though we can have high index of suspicion. But it is the case when you get all this stuff out of your diet and your life that many of these health problems go away. So we have sort of anecdotal reason to believe that it is this whole cocktail of chemicals that we surround ourselves with.
Mm-hmm. The scary thing, everybody knows about MRSA now. Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting. I know somebody who's still in the hospital since April from a paper cut that developed into MRSA. Oh. A paper cut, okay? So now I get all paranoid even if I get a paper cut. But your book says that 45% of Midwest hog farms had MRSA germs present. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really has become Russian roulette eating, even if you are vegetarian, because of the manure they're using to put on the crops. I mean, broccoli doesn't naturally create salmonella, okay? But here you have them using the manure from all these highly toxic animals, even on vegetables. So now, you have to worry about pretty much everything you put in your mouth. I'm like, what the hell? What kind of world is this? Soylent Green is people.
Well, yeah, there's a little, a page or two in the book about an experiment done at a good university that found that crops, and there are several different types of crops, corn, cabbage, I forget the other ones, but that were grown on manure from these animals with all the drugs in them, actually had antibiotics in them, because of course crops are going to use water, And so, as you say, even if you're vegan or vegetarian, you're not home free. And the antibiotics in the livestock is something that has gotten some attention from the press, and it's been castigated by many medical groups, even the top ones like the AMAs and, Union of Concerned Scientists. And, there's no consumer reason or even animal reason why big meat should be just infusing the animals with this. They do it because they make a little more. It's like you talk about the drought. The meat, there's such a thin profit margin on raising these poor animals that like feed is too expensive, they'll give them candy because it's absolute greed, that how pennies on each animal, so. Right. But the antibiotics, are indicted on in many medical areas. The first, of course, is the antibiotic resistant infections, like you just mentioned, like the MRSA, which is not just in hospitals and nursing homes; it's in the community.
Well,
and
you
there's
said
VRE.
You said that it's plentiful on Florida beaches where people swim. MRSA,
Mm-hmm.
That's that flesh-eating disease.
Yeah, the MRSA and the the staph and strep infections. I think the flesh eating is a strep, and I think I could be wrong that MRSA is staph. But then there's several others. There was one in the news this week, and I can't remember because some of these bacterium names, but it's considered now even more serious than the MRSA. And so, that's one aspect of the antibiotic use in the animals, but it's only one of the dangers. And that now we're beginning to see other reports, and some of this is not even in my book because it's so recent that it will be in my second book. But the idea that antibiotics given to kids, either through the meat or just given in the community, are causing other things. For example, the asthma. They're seeing that there's a correlation between kids being given antibiotics at a young age and getting asthma. And then you're seeing some arguments that allergies in general are coming from the antibiotics killing some of the friendly bacteria that we want, So antibiotics are dangerous and expensive drugs that should not be used cavalierly.
Right. Well, then you also have so many hormones injected into them that you look at our children and, by the time they're 10, they look like they're 18.
Well, certainly when I grew up, little girls did not hit puberty as they do now. I mean, if a girl hit puberty at even 10, you'd raise your eyebrows, and 8, you'd stop all food consumption and you'd try to figure out what's going on here. Mm-hmm. And now we say, oh, well, she's an early developer.
Right.
And it's we have the high rates of breast cancer and prostate cancer, and those are two cancers that the European Union claims our meat is correlated with and won't eat our meat because of the correlation to those two diseases, because of the hormones we treat our meat with. So, you just wonder, because, there was a time they said 1 out of 10 women had breast cancer, and now they're saying 1 out of 7. Well, why is that,
Mm-hmm. Well, they don't want to make the food connection. Years ago, before I became a vegetarian, and it was John Robbins' book, The Food Revolution, that was the grand finale for me to become a vegetarian.
Wow.
I said, that's it. Reading that book, I said, that's it. I can't make any more excuses for myself. Because like a lot of people, listen, I don't want to give it up either. We all make excuses and want to turn a blind eye to things we like to do. But reading that book, it was like, that's it. And it was really all I needed. It was like the grand finale.
Wow.
And what was interesting is before that, I was on thyroid medication for 13 years.
Oh my gosh.
When I went vegetarian, which was the only thing I had changed, and I don't know if you know, but when you have a thyroid problem, you have to get blood work every 6 months. Because your prescription could change, anything can go awry. And I remember it took 2 years, and I was post-menopausal, so you understand the hugeness of what I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
I had gone for my blood work. My doctor called me, and he said, Meria, your thyroid is working again. You don't need the medication.
Oh, my gosh.
So I said to him, wait a minute. I said, how is that possible? I says, I'm postmenopausal. I said, and you're telling me that a major hormonal system in my body, it has repaired itself after 13 years. And I told him the only thing I've done different is I became a vegetarian 2 years ago. And he paid zero attention to that. His answer was, I'm the luckiest person in the world, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, my gosh.
So I had to deduce that I was no longer taking in the animals' hormones and what they inject them with to mess up my own hormonal system. So I lived it, and I didn't become a vegetarian to fix my thyroid. That was just a pleasant side effect.
Well, I always tell people that, it's like anything. It's like giving up cigarettes or alcohol, At first you think, well, I love this stuff, I'm never going to do it, and you have no idea how good you'll feel. You know what it's like? It's like jumping into cold water when you're going to swim, and at first you think, oh my gosh, this is agony, and then you think this is bliss,
Right.
And it's if you just take that leap of faith, because I've never met anyone who gave up some of this bad stuff and said, I regret it, because
Right.
they feel so much better. You lose all that.
Well, look, I have to tell you, it was never my intention to do it to feel good or improve my health. I did it because I could no longer justify being an environmentalist and eating animals. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was more an animal rights thing than it was on whether I lived or died. It's like whatever.
I agree with you. I agree with you because there's so many reasons, but the ethics of it, the idea that the environment and the animals and that type of thing, and it's amazing how much people will, like arthritic conditions, will resolve because suddenly you're not putting these things in your body,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, when you say in your book, be careful what you eat and what you eat eats, couldn't be any more truer than in this world we live in now. Because there's so many cases of, look at Oprah, for a while at least she had gone meat-free. Mm-hmm. Bill Clinton, he's so much healthier. Too bad he waited till after he had a heart attack to become a vegetarian, and he brags about it.
Yeah, it's amazing how the difference it makes in people. Like you say, Clinton looks so much better. He even sounds better now. Mm-hmm. So there, and also the fact of what does the animal eat that you're eating, because you're still getting that. One drug that I talk about in the book is called rectopamine, and that you hear my bird there.
I do.
And
I like it.
Rectopamine is a growth-producing drug that's given to beef cattle or cattle, pork, and turkey, and it's not withdrawn at slaughter. So that means that when that animal is on the killing floor, within the animal's body is the drug. So in my opinion, there's no way it cannot be in the meat. And why would the meat not be? Most of these drugs will say, well, we withdraw it, 10 days before or a week before slaughter. And so in this case, people are eating it. And this rectopamine is a really nasty drug. It's an asthma-like drug that in the animals it causes hyperkinetic behavior. And you have to wonder, since it's in the meat, especially the pork, could it be causing all these kids?
Right. Well, I did a series of shows a while back with Will Tuttle. I don't know if you're familiar with Will. But
that rings a bell.
Yeah, he has a great book out. It's called The World Peace Diet.
Oh, okay, that does ring a bell.
And he's the only person brave enough that I have found to make the spiritual connection of eating the energy of tortured and murdered animals. And that's what really, you know, that expression, you are what you eat. Mm-hmm. What I found interesting is, you know, being Italian, and of course, my daughter is Italian, you know, mother-daughter arguments used to get pretty wild. And after I was a vegetarian for a while, my daughter was a little disappointed. She called me and she says, you know, Ma, it's not fun to argue with you anymore. And I said to her, what do you mean? She says, you're just no fun to argue with anymore. You just don't come back at me. And I realized that I eliminated all that negative energy coming into my body, that I actually had peace on the inside of me. And she was the one to notice it, because we would get into it, you know, like screaming wild Italians. And all of a sudden I was in a much better place emotionally. That is
so interesting. I know that I read once that somebody was cooking a lamb, and the adrenaline when that animal faced death somehow made her dog go crazy, because the animal recognized, you know, like you say, the energy, the torture, whatever you want. You know, that's sort of a hard chemical to define, but anybody who believes in life force knows that there's something there in that meat, and that's terror, you know, and to put that in your mouth. Well, I haven't, you know, I would never ever do that. People say, well, aren't there circumstances under which you'd eat meat? And my circumstances would be really close to where I'd eat people. In other words, inspiration. You know?
Right. If your plane went down in the Andes and you had no other choice but to eat the frozen dead, maybe. But I don't know. You know, look, we never really know what we're going to do at any given moment when we don't have a choice. But when you do have a choice, I've been screaming for years for people, vote with your fork. It's, you know, voting with your dollars, voting with your fork is really the only vote we have left. So
and to be educated, and your show does such a good job in educating people.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, here we are, you know, we're cloning animals. I'm sure there are cloned animals in the meat supply. We don't get labels. You know, Monsanto just outspent the people of California to make sure we don't get labels on our GMO food. That's not going to stop a lot of the movements out there. But, you know, if they thought their food was so healthy, number one, why don't they serve it in their own cafeteria, which Monsanto doesn't? They serve organic food in their cafeteria. And why not allow us the choice? Every other nation on earth, including Kenya and Haiti, rejects GMO food. So, you know, what we eat really means more now than it ever did. You know, you are what you eat.
Yeah, I certainly agree, you know.
And Martha, you know, I mean, I can only guess it took you forever to write this book, and I'm glad to hear you're writing another one. Make sure you get it to me.
Well, thank you, Maria. I just so enjoy talking to you on these topics, because you're so well informed yourself on not just in your research and your radio guests, but also in your line of work. You know, you're very, very informed, and so it makes it a pleasure to talk about these things, you know?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's people like you that have, you know, given me the information I need to be able to sound like I'm talking about this so easily when I've read like thousands of books. So as long as my eyes don't fail me, I guess I'll continue to do this. So again, Martha, thank you so much. And for my listeners out there, do the homework, okay? You don't have to take my word for it. You don't have to take Martha's word for it. Do the homework. Look at what they're doing to you, to your children. And if that doesn't piss you off and get you into action, then nothing will, you know? And any final word on that, Martha?
I think we've just pretty much covered it. I'd like to repeat the name of the book one more time, if you don't mind.
No, right ahead.
Okay, the book is called Born with a Junk Food Deficiency, How Flax, Quacks, and Hacks Pimp the Public Health, and that would mean the public relations people, the doctors on the take, and politicians.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Martha. We'll talk again.
Oh, thank you, Maria.
You're very welcome.
All right, then. Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and supporting The Meria Show. Tell others what you learned today. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it's shared. Encourage others to subscribe today. www.meria.net. Often imitated, never duplicated. A world of information all in one place. www.meria.net. Always ahead of the curve. Always on your side. Get active or get radioactive. Subscribe today.